building the 9800 X3D with DDR5 8000 because why not? So that is exactly what we're going to do for the utmost performance. The other thing too is this doesn't require a lot of VSOC. So the pros doesn't require a lot. Let's do pros and cons now of the. We're gonna have to delete some of this stuff. Well, we'll just put like this. Pros of DDR5 8000. Low VSOC. Low idle power. Those are the pros. The cons. Need a high-end motherboard. Uh, 8,000 kit is expensive. Those are the cons. So that's what, and I know I'm kind of in the way on that, but anyway, you guys get the idea. So that is, so we'll just say this is for DDR5 8000, and then this is for DDR5 6000, and then the pros and cons for DDR5 6000. The pros, easy, oh no, okay, works on cheap well, I won't say cheap. We'll just say works on any motherboard. Works on any motherboard. The motherboard's not a determining factor. You can use a 6-layer motherboard. It'll work. No problem. The cheaper memory. Cons. High VSOC. High idle power. So basically, the complete opposite of running your RAM at 8000. The heavy burden is on the CPU. That is why it has higher idle power, because the VSOC is running at a higher voltage. So that is, what are we saying? Will RAM memory split with it? Ideally, you do not want to do that. You can do that. It's not a good idea. I don't recommend that. Ideally, you want the same amount per channel. You don't want different amounts on different channels. You can. Windows can interleave memory. It's smart enough to interleave memory. But you're going to end up in a scenario where the Windows scheduler wants to use one channel more than the other. So you're not going to get exact load balancing for applications, if that makes sense. So it's not ideal. Let's just say that. It's not ideal. 4K X3D doesn't really benefit you. I have 5800X, worth it to upgrade to the... Yeah, I would say yes. So the 5800X is still a decent CPU. It's a 4-year-old CPU at this point. But yeah, regardless, the 9800X3D is going to be faster in everything at this point. It's just so much newer. It's going to be faster in productivity. It's going to be faster. It's going to be faster in everything. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, 8000 is expensive, but it's, you know, it's better. It's better, but it's... oh, the other thing I'll say on this, you know, there's another good point here. Another con for 8000. I guess another pro. Pro for 6000 can handle for large amounts. Large amounts. You know, large. Thanks for the super chat. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, if you want to super chat the question, and you want me to answer it in depth, technical discussion, we can do that too. But yeah, so if I was on AM4, because you're on a 5800X, if I was on a 5800X, I would definitely consider upgrading to the 9800X 3D. That's because, you know why? Because you've gotten 4 years, assuming you got the 5800X unit, it was brand new at launch, which would have been in the middle of the pandemic, in the year of 2020, when everybody was trying to buy a PlayStation 5, 4 years ago, everyone was trying to buy PS5, Xbox Series X, RTX 3080, RTX 3090. It was happening. It was this time of year, 4 years ago. Oh, did I say RTX 4090? I meant, no, yeah, 3080, 3090, yeah, 30 series. And then RDNA 2. So 6800 XT, 6800, which was a unicorn. You never saw it. Doesn't exist. It was always scalped. Everything was being scalped 4 years ago. And that was when Zen 3 launched, aka Ryzen 5000, was new during the pandemic era. It was known as the beginning of the dark times in the tech history, in the tech world. We've talked about the dark times. The dark times began sometime in around Q3, the end of Q3 of 2020. So do we want to do the dark times graph or the timeline? We have 2019. We have 2020. This is like bonus paint right here. Like, I wasn't expecting to do the timeline. 2022. Man, we're starting to get too much stuff on the board, though. I have to wipe some of this stuff out. 2024. That's where we are now. And then we have next year. We all know what's coming out next year. There's a lot of stuff. But anyway, so here we had Zen 2, PCIe 4.0, 5700 XT. That was 2019. Then we had 2020. 2020 had, yeah, I really need to delete this 70. This stuff is in the way. But what? Here, just let's do this. There. We'll just do that. And pretend that it's not there. We had Zen 3, aka Ryzen 5000. We had Radeon 6000 RTX 30 series, PS5, Xbox Series X, all that good stuff. 2020 was the big year. The big year. Lots of stuff. Lots of electronics. It was a very expensive year. And it was also the pandemic. Get this out of here. This is not supposed to be here. So, that was 2020. So, the reason why I'm drawing this is to illustrate a point. I am someone who believes in the 3, 5, and 7 year principle. Which means you can use a computer for minimum 3 years. After 3 years, if you want to upgrade, that is considered acceptable because you're at that 3-year cycle. Why do we use 3 years specifically? Because that is when the warranty on pretty much everything in that computer is expired. So you no longer have any warranty. Which means if something breaks in your PC, you cannot get an RMA because it's no longer supported. It's out of warranty. So the 3-year mark is a good benchmark. So here we are, 3 years back. 1, 2, 3. So anybody with a computer that is from 2021 or older, if they're thinking about upgrading, they have, like, in order to justify the expense of upgrading, you ideally want your computer to be at least 3 years old because that indicates that you no longer have any warranty on any of the things in that computer. Assuming the computer has everything in it that has been built from 3 years ago. Not meaning you didn't upgrade, you know, like your GPU or something last year or this year or whatever, because that doesn't count. That's still new. Then there is the 5-year principle. So if somebody goes beyond 3 years, then they go to the 5-year. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, look. That's Ryzen 3000. The Ryzen 5 3600 is now almost 5.5 years old. Anyone on the 3950X, the 3800X, the 3700X, the 3600X, all of the Zen 2, aka Ryzen 3000, are now over 5. They're technically 5 years old. So that would be a good upgrade. If you, for whatever reason, still hold on to the hardware, then you go to the 7-year. So the 7-year would go back 2 more years. That means you would have a computer with a 1080 Ti and a first generation Ryzen. So like a Ryzen 7 1700 or a Ryzen 7 1800X or a Ryzen 5 1600X. You know, like those are 7-year-old parts with the GeForce GTX, not RTX, GTX 1080 Ti. That GPU is now 7.5 years old. Let's put things into perspective. The 1080 Ti and the first generation of Ryzen are the exact same age. That gives you an idea of how old one of the legendary GPUs is, as well as Zen 1. So that is old. If you have a computer that is 7 years old, that is considered the furthest back that I would consider hanging on to it. Meaning anything that reaches 7 years old when it comes to electronics, in this case we're talking about a desktop PC, that is definitely eligible for upgrade. That is more than eligible for upgrade. And really anything out there that's recent, that includes 9700X or the 9950X, heck, even Intel's new Core Ultra series. As flawed as that launch was, that's still going to be a world apart in terms of how much better that is compared to a Zen 1 CPU from 2017. So that gives you an idea. Anything, so I go as far back as 7 years. I operate on the 3, 5, and 7-year upgrade cycle. Anything older than 7 years is too old, and you know, like that should be upgraded, ideally. So, but that's pretty much the principle. That's what I recommend people do. So the minimum would be like 3 years. So that brings us to 2021. And what launched at the end of 2020? Zen 3, which means Ryzen 5000. So that goes back to the original point about the 5800X. The 5800X is 4 years old. So technically, you're beyond the 3-year mark, but you're not at the 5-year mark. So anybody out there who has a Zen 3, so like a 5800X, a 5950X, any of those CPUs, if they upgrade now to a 9800X 3D or anything out there that's from this year, that would be a worthy upgrade. Anything older would be even better. So, but if it's more recent, then now it's questionable. Because where does, so for example, let's clean some of this up here. Let's do this. So, 2022. What launched in 2022? Zen 4, RTX 4090, the RDNA 3. So this was Radeon 7 7900 stuff, like that stuff launched. So this was 2 years ago. This is 2 years ago. So Ryzen 7000 is 2 years old. So technically, Ryzen 7000 is not, in my mind, is not eligible for upgrade because it's still too new to justify spending all that money to upgrade it. Now, here's the one thing though that I want to point out. The nice thing about the Zen 4 and the Zen 5, which launched this year. So this year we got Zen 5. So the nice thing about this is they share the same socket. They're both AM5. So even though, if, like, let's say for instance, somebody is on a 7700X. The 7700X is an 8-core CPU that launched 2 years ago. So it was September of 2022. So it's a little more, it's like, what, 2 years and 2 months now? Or 2 years and 1 month, I should say. So it's, you know, what is that, 25 months. It's 25 months old at this point. So technically speaking, I would not recommend upgrading to Zen 5 if you're on Zen 4 because it hasn't reached the 3-year mark yet. However, that's going to be up to you because if someone already has Zen 4, if they truly want to upgrade to the 9800X3D, for example, it's just a drop-in upgrade, which means they only have to buy the CPU. They can keep using their existing motherboard. So that is one of the benefits. That is a huge perk of being on the AM5 platform. Is it's basically, you gotta think of it like you're subsidizing the cost of upgrades because you get to carry over the motherboard for multiple CPU generations. So that is actually a pretty nice incentive there. That is a very good, I guess what I would say is that is a good selling point for AMD's platform compared to their competitor. So technically speaking, Zen 4 is not old enough to justify an upgrade, but Zen 3 is old enough. So if you're on AM4, if you're on a DDR4, if you're on a DDR4 motherboard, you can totally upgrade to a 9800X3D and it's going to be good. That's the way I looked at it. If you're on DDR5, then you truly have to decide, assuming you're on an AMD DDR5 platform, which would be Zen 4, you have to decide if you want to spend the money to do that drop-in socket upgrade. But if you're on Intel, you know, it gets even harder to justify because, especially if you're on a DDR5 Intel, because if you bought into DDR5 on Intel early on, which would have been the tail end of 2021 or early 2022, you paid a lot of money for some low-end DDR5, assuming you actually bought DDR5, because most people that bought Intel's 12th gen, this was 11th and 12th gen, both were in 2021. One was in May, the other was in November, but Intel double launched that year because the 11th gen was such a disaster that they had to double launch. So, because, you know, damage control, reputation, salvation, whatever you want to call it, they had to fix the problem. So, if you're someone who bought into DDR5 with Alder Lake back in literally almost 3 years ago, which means you're literally on the line for minimum eligibility for upgrade, at least in my mind, by the 3-year model. If you're on Alder Lake, technically, it is considered acceptable to consider upgrading to a 9800X3D. Because your computer has technically reached the 3-year mark.
Fuck is that?
Now, here's the cool thing, though. If you actually bought DDR5 back in 2021 when it was like $800 for like 64 gigs of RAM or something, or like $500 for like a decent, you know, like a 6432 gigabyte kit or whatever, or maybe it was like 5600. You know, back then it was terribly expensive and it was low-end RAM. Like DDR4 was still faster than DDR5 at that time. But anyway, the point is, if you bought DDR5 in 2021 and you super overpaid, you can still carry that RAM over to your Zen 5 build. You can replace your Intel 12th gen with a 9800X3D, and you can still use the same RAM. So that's the one interesting inference that I just figured out by talking through this. So it's like, yeah, you have DDR5 from 3 years ago, even though it's probably some pretty trash DDR5 compared to the DDR5 that you can get now, you can still use it with the X3D. It'll work. It'll work totally fine.
Son of a
So, yeah, that's an option. Okay. What was the question? There was some question. Oh, I want to get 8,000 MT CU dim. QDIM, I don't know how much of a difference it's gonna make, to be honest. I don't really think it's. See, the question in my mind is, does CU dim help, like, lower the impact that the motherboard has? Like, if you have a high-end motherboard, I don't know if CU dim actually matters. But CU dim, if you can, like, for instance, if you can run 8,000 CU dim or QDIM on a 6-layer motherboard, then okay, then it helps. But if it doesn't help in that scenario, then it kind of defeats the purpose of having it. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not 100% sold on QDIM until I see some actual tangible benefits to it. Because if one thing I have looked at, like with, for instance, the Intel Core Ultra series, these CPUs, the QDIM, they can run QDIM, but it doesn't help because the latency is so bad. So it's like, I don't see the point of it unless it helps in some tangible way. Okay.
Hardpoint located. Hardpoint locked down.
What X870E board do you recommend?
Hardpoint active.
That is a very broad question. You have to decide your use case. It's going to be based on the use case. Like, how are you going to use the computer? Like, that's the question. Because the thing about the motherboards is, yes, there's a tier list, but the tier list is not the be-all, end-all. You have to realize that certain motherboards are geared toward certain roles. Like, they do certain things better than other motherboards. That is the thing about the motherboards that makes them all so different. Let's put it this way. Comparing motherboards is far more interesting and far more challenging to do compared to, like, comparing graphics cards. Because graphics cards are so cut and dry.
Son of a cunt.
It's like, how much money are you willing to spend on a graphics card? What monitor do you have? Are you going to get a new monitor? You know, what resolution are the games being played at? You know, like, that's really it. And then it's like, okay, well, which graphics card do you like the look of better? They all do the same thing. So it's not like a motherboard where a motherboard, I've said this before and I'll say it again. The motherboard ultimately determines what you can and cannot do with your computer. So the motherboard decision is a very important decision that is often overlooked. For example, not every motherboard will allow you to run DDR5 8000. A cheap or a lower end motherboard will not do this. So meaning if you cheap out on the motherboard, you instantly lock yourself out of being able to do like DDR5 8000, for example. See? So the motherboard is a very, very important choice when building a PC. It's the foundation. It determines ultimately what you can and cannot do with your computer. And that's just talking about RAM. We haven't even talked about, like, live streaming use case, because certain motherboards are way better at live streaming than others. in ways that people don't even think about when they're buying a motherboard.
Why is the
That's
enemy
just another example.
mines
What
and
about
claymores?
gaming?
Why are
Gaming,
they
for the most part, they're all gonna be the
outlined
same.
in red, like bright
they're all
red?
gonna be able to do the same.
That seems
They're
dumb.
like plus or minus 1%.
I mean,
-1 to plus 1%.
if they're
It's
like
so margin of error,
super
that
shiny and obvious, then
but it's like
they
the
seem
other
pretty
things that you're gonna use
useless.
The motherboard plays a massive role in either enabling you or disabling you from doing certain things. MSI Tomahawk is limited. Yeah, I had a hard time getting. I can't get 8,000 to work properly on the Tomahawk. 5930K is a Haswell E. That is an HEDT from the year 2014. So if somebody is on a 5930K, their computer is 10 years old and should be upgraded. I don't know where that came. I just saw someone mention 5930K. 5930K is on a platform called X99. It is an old, ancient, not quite a dinosaur yet, but it's pushing pretty close at this point. The speed at which technology changes, let's put it this way, computers age so much faster than organic beings. You know, unless we're talking about like flies or something that doesn't really have a very long lifespan, computers age pretty quick in the sense that technology moves so fast that a 10-year-old computer is really, really old.
Should I wait for 9950X3D if the only other thing I do apart from gaming is web browsing and Microsoft Word?
That's a good question. So really, you have to ask yourself, do you really ever see yourself using those extra threads, those extra cores and threads in the future? Because based off of what you said, like gaming and web browsing, an 8-core is more than enough for that. So 8-core, 16-thread, that's going to handle gaming. That's going to handle like any sort of Microsoft Office. It's overkill for Microsoft Office because all laptops can handle that. If you're doing like Excel with a lot of number crunching, the multi-thread sometimes helps in that, but we're talking about like a really, really big Monte Carlo simulation. So if you're not doing anything like that, then no, then there's not really much of a reason to wait. The only thing is we don't really know exactly what the 9950X3 will have. Like there's rumors out there saying that possibly both CCDs have 3D V-cache on them. Some rumors say that it's going to be similar to the 7950X3D, except it's going to have Zen 5 architecture. And now that we know that they've flipped the They've flipped the 3D caches underneath the CCD now, so we can assume that AMD is going to do the same thing with the dual CCD next year. So there's that, but I don't know. I would assume that the 9950X3D will probably have a better binned CCD, so that one will have higher clocks, boost clocks out of the gate stock versus the 9800X3D. I would assume that's the case because the fact that they're launching, well, it's kind of interesting because AMD is doing the reverse of what they did last time. So originally they launched the dual CCD first, and then they launched the single CCD second. This time around, they're doing it backwards. They're launching the single CCD first, and they're launching the dual CCD second. So, I don't know what that means, because the dual CCD is typically going to be a more expensive product, which means it's a higher-end segment, which means that it's going to have the better build dies. This is no different from, you know, the difference between like an i9 from Intel versus an i7. The i9 has the best bin die. So I would assume the Ryzen 9 will have the best bin die. So it's, I mean, I can tell you, like, as somebody who literally has the 9700X and the 9950X, I can tell you the 9950X is faster in single thread performance because it has its first CCD boosts and clocks far higher than the single CCD on the 9700X. So I would assume the 9950X is going to get a better binned CCD compared to a 9800X 3D. But, I mean, the way, what you use your computer for, to me, sounds like the 9800X 3D is fine. Like, I don't see much of a reason to wait. That being said, though, I know that you currently have the 7950X 3D, which is still a monster CPU for both gaming and multi-threading. So, and it's not super old yet, so it's up to you. Like, the benefits of being on the AM5 socket is you can easily do a socket upgrade and keep the same motherboard. You have the Ace motherboard from MSI, you can just keep using that, and that's totally fine. Or you can just wait it out and see what happens with the 9950X 3D. It's going to be a couple months. I think it's going to come out around the time when Monster Hunter Wilds launches next year. So, you know, it's up to you. Technically speaking, though, I would say you're probably going to want to wait. If I were in your position, I would probably wait just because I'd be following my own advice, where technically the Zen 4 architecture is only in the 2-year block, so it's not really 3 years. So that's why it's kind of more of a wait-and-see approach. But appreciate the super chat. It's kind of crazy how X3D launches the same day as PS5. Yeah, we talked about that at the very beginning of the stream. That's going to make it hard to cover it because, like, at the same time, my original plan for the channel was to cover the PlayStation 5 Pro launch, but now this 9800X 3D thing is just kind of crashing the party for everyone. They're crashing Intel's party. They're basically, like, overriding Zen 5's news, and they're now crashing the PS5 Pro's party, so it's kind of weird. It's just like, oh, it's just deciding to show up now. It's like Goku from Dragon Ball. Well, okay, no, we've already talked about who's who in Dragon Ball Z universe. Basically, 9800X 3D's Ultimate Gohan is basically like Ultimate Gohan arriving late to go and fight Super Buu. That is exactly what the 9800X 3D is doing. If anyone's confused on what I just said, just ignore that last sentence, because if you didn't get the Dragon Ball Z reference, that's okay. Expect it together with what? I must return mine on December 25th. The what?
UAV established overhead.
How snappy do you think Windows will be in workload? I think it's going to be the same as Zen 5. It's not going to be any different from Zen 5. And Zen 5 is currently the fastest desktop processor. Hardware Unbox ran the Tomahawk at 8100. Okay, well, I mean, I don't know. You got to remember that they could have been using a different memory kit than me. But I've been using the same memory kit that has always worked for at 8000 on my other motherboards. I didn't have any problems on those boards, but I couldn't get it to work on the Tomahawk that I was using.
Watchdog Hilo incoming on your location.
I mean, it works, but it's like not 100% stable. So it's not something that I would actually run. You had Strix, or you started PC building in 2021? And you had the Strix 12900K and the Hero for the 79. Oh, so you had, okay. So you had a Z690 ROG Strix and an X670E Hero, Crosshair Hero, for the 7950X. Those CPUs are only 1 year apart in age. But the 12900K is now 3 years old, and the 7950X is now 2 years old. Now you're getting the X870E Strix and passing the X670E here. So you're passing the... Really? The X670E is the Hero is a very good board. Technically speaking, I would say that yeah, the new Strix is technically one tier lower in terms of Asus's product positioning. The Hero is a higher end product. So what's the reason for the Strix? Do you want the better heat sinks? Because the Strix has better heat sinks for M.2 drives than the Hero. The Hero's cool the Hero has pretty lousy M.2 cooling compared to the Strix. You think it is worth the money upgrading from the i9 11900K? Well, remember, you gotta remember what I said about the 3, 5, and 7 year life cycle. So you gotta think about that. Objectively speaking, if you remove emotions or the desire to upgrade for the sake of upgrading and the sake of spending money on just having a new computer, if you remove that and you just look at it objectively, if we're looking at the 3, 5, and 7 year cycle, where does the 11th gen fall? You have to ask yourself, how old is the 11900K and where does it line up in terms of the upgrade life cycle? So here we are at the tail end of 2024. Zen 5 is the latest. We are in 2024. Soon we will be in 2025. So we're kind of like right here. 1, 2, 3. Now we've hit the 3 year life cycle. What was 3 years ago? The 12th gen Intel was November 2021. The 11th gen was around spring, or we'll say, I don't remember the exact date. I'm going to go ahead and say it was like April or May of 2021. So it is over 3 years old, which means the 11th gen falls into the minimum required life cycle of 3 years. So can you upgrade? The answer is yes, objectively, because all of the 11th gen stuff is out of warranty and no longer supported.
Report to the nearest
Yeah, the 5930K is super old, man. You're gonna be like, you're super CPU bound in like so many games. I can't even imagine what it would be like to run Dragon's Dogma 2 on a 5930K. That must be rough. That must be rough. I mean, that's DDR. Well, that is actually DDR4, but that's like the very first platform that supported DDR4. So that's like DDR4 2400 or 2666. At least you got quad channel memory, but you're so bound. You're so CPU bound on IPC core processing that, man, yeah, no, that's 5930K back in the day. That was like the ideal CPU for HEDT, but today, If you're on a fixed budget, would you spend more on 8,000 DDR5 or a better motherboard with DDR5? Okay, that is an interesting comment. That's an interesting comment. But the comment doesn't take into account what was said earlier. So, there's a dichotomy with the comment about 8,000 DDR5 or a better motherboard with DDR6000. So, okay, first of all, if you have a lower end motherboard, so if you're trying to save money So you can buy DDR5 8000. You cannot run DDR5 8000 on a low-end motherboard. You have to buy a high-end motherboard. You need... I gotta move out of the way. I'm in the way here.
Hardpoint is secure.
Oh, I gotta move off the screen. You need a high-end motherboard. One of the cons of DDR5 8000 is you must have an expensive high-end motherboard. So if you want DDR5 8000, that automatically means you have to buy an expensive motherboard. You cannot buy DDR5 8000, then go buy a cheap motherboard like a B650 motherboard and expect it to work. It will not work. I'll tell you that right now. It just won't work. So you cannot take expensive RAM and put it with a cheap motherboard. That's not going to work. If you're going with high-end RAM, you have to also go with high-end motherboards. But that's a good question, because that is a good question to help educate people on these limitations and these requirements. So, if you want to save money on a motherboard, get DDR5 6000 because it works on any motherboard, even the cheapest motherboards. So that is a very good comment though, because that question does help, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people watching the stream that probably didn't even know that, or they didn't think about that. Okay, is the Gigabyte X870 Aorus Elite motherboard good? You're gonna be using it for gaming. So the X870 Aorus Elite is probably not gonna be the best one for 8000, but yeah, it's good. It's good for gaming and content creation, and you can run like DDR5 6000. You can run a lot of RAM. You can run like 192 gigabytes of RAM on there at like anywhere from like 4800 to at least 5200, if not 5600. But you could probably do 5600 at 192 gigabytes of RAM on the Aorus Elite. So yeah, that's fine for that use case. I don't know because I have not tested the Nova, so I can't answer that. If anybody has the Nova and they've tested 8000, do let us know, because I'm also very curious to know about that.
Think real carefully about your next duck.
256 gigabytes of RAM will be supported on all of them. It just depends on BIOS updates, guys. Keep in mind, there is currently no 256 gigabyte memory kit on consumer desktop. If you want 256 gigabytes of RAM, you have to go with Threadripper, because that only exists with RDIMM. You have to have registered DIMMs if you want that much RAM. It's another good question. Oh, that's a pretty good question too, though. Should I upgrade from the 7800X3D to the new? Edgar, you're gonna have to decide. That's gonna be on you. Technically, that does not fall into what I said. Remember what I said. Your CPU needs to be 3, 5, or 7 years. The 7800X3D is not even 2 years old yet. So technically speaking, if you're on a 7800X3D, you're not eligible for upgrade. Now when I say that, that doesn't mean that you can't upgrade. You can totally upgrade if you really want to. But I'm just saying, objectively speaking, remove all the emotions from the desire to upgrade. Looking at things in a vacuum, like from outer space. If this is Earth and this is outer space and we're up here on the moon and we're like looking, if someone's looking, this is an eyeball, looking down at you on the planet Earth, you know, like here is North America, here's South America, over here Latin America, then you have the EU over here, Western Europe over there, then you have Africa down there. So like if someone's looking from space and they see the comment, if I have a 7800X3D, should I upgrade to a 9800X3D? The answer they'll tell you is no, you shouldn't. Because it's too recent,
Hardpoint
objectively. But if you want to upgrade, you can. That's a decision you have to make.
Hardpoint is secure.
But if we do the life cycle, we are here 1.5.
Hardpoint active. Hostiles have the hardpoint.
We're only at 1.5 years old on 7800X3D, so it's not old enough. It's not even at the minimum of like 2 years. So it's probably not worth it. I'm actually glad I drew the timeline now, because, like, okay, here's the dark times. The dark times happened here, and then they went back to normal, like, there. This area, this section of history, from the end of 2020 to the middle of 2022 was known as the dark times.
Hostiles have captured
This is the
hardpoint.
dark times,
Secure.
when the RTX 3060 Ti was $900.
Hostile LZ
That's what I mean by the dark times. It was impossible to get hardware at decent prices. Unless you're buying SS, well, even SS, well, it was terrible. It was just a terrible time to be building PCs.
Hostiles have captured
Crucial
the hardpoint.
T700? What about the Crucial T700? Robbie D, Crucial T700, what for? For a PC build?
Yo, I saw his outline.
What was the question? I just saw the comment, Crucial T700. I don't know, what are we talking about? I mean, Crucial T700, I'm using one right now. It's great, it's fast.
Point located. We claimed the advantage. Now hold it. Hostiles have the hardpoint.
You just sold a 6950 Red Devil.
Hardpoint active. Hardpoint is secure.
Okay.
Ah!
Hostiles
Okay,
LZ
so,
established
you can run 4 sticks of RAM. You just have to wait for it to train. It'll take like 5 minutes or more the first time. So if anybody wanting to run 4 sticks of RAM, I have lots and lots of videos on my YouTube channel showing
Gray requesting
how to
UAV.
run
Gray authorizing
4 sticks
UAV
of
mission.
DDR5. So it can run. Every motherboard, let me repeat this. Every motherboard that has 4 slots for RAM can run 4 sticks of memory. Yes, you can. Tomahawk can do it. I tested it. It
Easy.
works. You have to wait for it to train. If you sit there and you wait for 2 minutes and you're thinking that it's not working, that means you haven't waited long enough. You have to wait longer. We've shown this when I did the build video with the Crosshair Hero. It took several minutes to train 4 sticks of DDR5. So you have to wait. After it does the training, it won't be that long the subsequent times, but you have to wait. I don't know how much RAM you're trying to run, because the more RAM you're running, the longer it takes to train.
Hostiles have the hardpoint.
No, it can run 4 sticks. Have you tried 4 sticks of RAM? Unless you have a defective motherboard, but you would be able to determine that based on the code on the
Oh, fuck.
LED panel. The 7-segment display will tell you what the code is. Okay, Thermalright HR10.
Hostiles have captured the hardpoint.
What is this? People are just listing SSDs
Come
now. Is that the thing to do?
on.
What are we talking about? What speed? What? Got the elite item. Okay, so the people are just listing off computer components. Yeah, that's okay. What was I gonna do? Oh, let's look at the Let's look at one of these motherboards that hasn't come out yet, but it is coming out soon because I've seen people starting to do unboxing videos. Or not unboxing videos, but overview videos. So this motherboard from Gigabyte is coming out soon. Real soon. The X870E Aorus Extreme AI Top. This is an AI motherboard. This is the highest end Gigabyte motherboard that's launching real soon. So the reason why I'm mentioning this one is because there is very little info on this. And this motherboard does not unlike a lot of Gigabyte's motherboards, at least the X870, X870E line from Gigabyte, all of their motherboards, except this one, have GPU lane sharing. This one, the best one they've got, does not have GPU lane sharing. Unless you want to run a second GPU in the second slot. That one uses 8 lanes from the primary, so you can run dual GPU on this motherboard. But that's really the only thing, like, meaning you can populate every M.2 slot on the board, and you don't have to worry about lane sharing. So this is one of the boards that's like that. There's not a whole lot that are like that, but this is one of them. That being said, I do want to point out again that the next generation of graphics cards will most likely be on PCIe Gen 5. So 8 lanes of PCIe Gen 5 is equal to 16 lanes of Gen 4 in terms of the bandwidth. So it's not like it's going to be that big of a deal, assuming you're on a Gen 5 GPU. So that's just, I wanted to point that out because, you know, I've seen a lot of comments, particularly on the tier list video, about GPU lane sharing and how everybody wants to avoid GPU lane sharing. For the 40 series, for all the current GPUs, yeah, I can understand why you want to avoid GPU lane sharing, because there's always those random games that scale with PCIe, but there's not a lot of them. It's mostly the Sony games, like Spider-Man, Ryzen. Those games scale with PCIe, so the less PCIe
Hey, that's me.
lanes you have, the lower the
Mom, I'm
FPS is
famous.
in those particular games. But most other games, they don't really have any difference in performance if you're running at X8 versus X16 on Gen 4. So I wanted to point that out because I got a lot of people commenting like, oh, well, I want a motherboard that avoids lanes, and everybody seems to think that the Nova is the only good motherboard because, first of all, the Nova is not the only motherboard that doesn't share lanes. All the ASRock boards don't share lanes. So Tai Chi also, just saying, the Tai Chi's out there, and it also doesn't share lanes. The Tomahawk from MSI also doesn't share lanes. And that is a single chipset motherboard. That's X870. That isn't even X870E. The Godlike from MSI also doesn't share lanes. And this Extreme AI Top from Gigabyte also doesn't share lanes. So there are more motherboards than just the Nova that also don't share lanes. We're not talking about X670E. X670E, none of them, except for very, very few of them, but none of them shared lanes. The X670E Tai Chi does not share lanes. All the older motherboards don't share lanes. Let's put it that way. And the reason why the newer ones do, or are more likely to share lanes, is because of USB 4. We've talked about this in other live streams. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, because that's like another whole hour discussion right there on why the lane sharing is the way it is. But yeah, this board from Gigabyte is actually very nice. So this is a motherboard that has like everything that you don't even know that you need. Like, for example, it has a RGB Wi-Fi 7 320 megahertz antenna. So they have a RGB Wi-Fi 7 antenna. It's magnetic. On the back, They have a lot of 10 gig. There are no USB 2.0 and there are no 5 gig USB ports. Everything on here is 10 gig USB or USB 4 in the case of the dual 40 gigabit USB 4 ports there. Then there's HDMI, there's clear CMOS, and a bunch of USB. But here's the crazy thing about this. This is because it's AI focused. It is heavily focused on artificial intelligence. According to Gigabyte, in order for you to be hardcore serious about AI, if you're someone who cares about AI, they're going to give you a motherboard with not one, but two 10 gig Ethernet ports. This motherboard is the only flagship board that offers dual 10 gig networking plus the fast Wi-Fi 7. We've talked about this in other live streams. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I've already done the tier list video, and this one was missing in action, so it was not included. But this one is actually really high end. The motherboard is insanely beautiful. Yeah, this is actually a full LCD screen. This is an infinity mirror screen display, similar to what is on the Asus Extreme. The Taichi does have the external overclock. We looked at that when I did the build video on it. Yeah, there's the postcode. There's the memory. It has the reinforced memory for the 8,000 sticks. It has that reinforced titanium ultra durable. They're calling it ultra durable PCIe armor for the second and the primary. So the primary and the secondary both have the reinforced titanium armor. So this is for dual GPU. So you would put, you know, like you would probably, I don't know if you would fit a second 4090 down here because this is kind of, I don't think it'll fit. It's too thick. But any of the dual, like for example, the professional graphics cards that use blower style cooling, you could put two of them in here easily. Now you wouldn't be able to use this bottom slot if you put a dual slot GPU down here, but technically you could run X8 with dual GPU on this board. So I totally understand why they're calling it AI top, because only someone who's serious about AI, I mean, I guess if a gamer wanted this, it's like, yeah, you could technically use it for gaming and streaming, and it would be totally fine for that use case. But I feel like you don't have to buy the highest end board just for like gaming and even streaming. Like, this is really meant for someone who's going to be using it as a power user workstation. I say workstation, but I hesitate to call it a workstation because I don't consider standard Ryzen AM5 true workstation. That's not true high-end desktop. That would be Threadripper, which we've talked about previously, which Gigabyte does have an AI top Threadripper board, which is insane. It is like a wall in terms of how big it is, but yeah. You're buying the 9900X3D as soon as it drops. The X870E Strix and Hero is certified Dolby Atmos. You do 3D render with a lot of AI stuffs, and the 5600X plus 3060 Ti isn't enough anymore. Yeah, that PC sounds like a PC that was built during the dark times. I'm just saying. Zen 3 plus RTX 30 series, especially the 3060 Ti, sounds like something that was built during the dark times, meaning 2021. That was the midst of the dark times. Thoughts on 9700X? I mean, I think it's fine, but I think because we're so close to the 9800X 3D, there really isn't a reason to get one. You just want to wait for the 9800X 3D. I mean, unless you don't really. Well, let's put it this way. So here's the thing. 9700X. This is a good point to bring up about 9700X. So the thing that a lot of people seem to not really think about or realize is that the resolution of your monitor determines ultimately whether or not your CPU or your GPU matters more. So if you're gaming at 1080p, for example, maybe in some cases 1440p, the CPU matters a lot more than if you're gaming at, say, 4K resolution. So if you're gaming at 4K resolution and you have a 9700X, and let's say on you have two computers side by side. One is on a 9700X, the other is on a 9800X 3D, and they're both gaming at 4K resolution. You would be assuming the GPU is the same in both systems, and the only difference is the two different CPUs. You would have a very hard time, if not, it would be impossible to tell the difference between the 9700X and the 9800X 3D, because at 4K resolution, you become GPU bound in almost every single scenario. So that is one thing to note. So if you're gaming at 4K resolution, the CPU doesn't matter as much as it does, or its role doesn't have as much impact while gaming compared to the GPU, or compared to if you were playing the game at a lower, or its role doesn't have as much impact. That is something to note. So it's like, yeah, the 9800X 3D is the fastest gaming CPU, but if you're gaming at 4K, and if you get the 9700X instead, because it's going to be like 100 or more, it'll probably be like $150 less money than the 9800X 3D. So you're saving a lot of money if you go with a 9700X, and you can still overclock the 9700X. And it's low power. So it's like, for 4K, you can save $150 to get a 4K OLED. You know what I'm saying? So there's things like that. But the thing is, if you're gaming at 4K, you have to have a very high-end graphics card, either a 4080 Super or a 7900 XTX. Those are the two that I would consider like the minimum. And then you would either that or the 4090. So it's like, assuming you have one of those three GPUs, then you can save money on the CPU and get yourself a better monitor if you're wanting to game at 4K. So there's a lot of I think of it like there's this decision tree that has like so many different permutations and like different paths that you could take, determining, or like it's based off of what you're building. Like, what's your ultimate gaming setup going to look like? What's the resolution of the monitor? That's probably the most important factor, to be honest, because that will determine like what CPU you can go with, what GPU you should have, things like that. And then the GPU will determine what kind of power supply you have, for instance. So it all just kind of like starts from what is the resolution that you're playing the game at, and then you just go from there. The 4080 is weak at 4K. Yeah, it is kind of underwhelming at 4K. I don't know what it is about it. It just doesn't seem... There's something about it, because I was testing like Final Fantasy 16. The 4080 Super is very disappointing at 4K in Final Fantasy 16. The 7900 XTX does a lot better than the 4080 Super in that game at 4K. So it's, yeah, I don't know what it is about that card. It just doesn't seem. I mean, it's efficient, but it's like, it's kind of underwhelming at that resolution. 9950X is great, even for 1080p. QHD will do. 9950X is actually one of the best CPUs right now. Like low key, like just saying low key, best CPU overall is probably 9950X. I mean, it's expensive, but it's really, really good. I mean, there's a reason why I'm using it right now as the live stream PC. Just saying. So, yeah. It's like everyone else is just kind of like arguing about, you know, this CPU over here and that one and this one and Intel's one and this AMD one and that one and the 3D and this one. And meanwhile, I'm just sitting over here with like, I don't know what those people are arguing about, but okay, I'm just going to use 9950X. No, I'm not using a Nova. I don't have a Nova. I don't understand what this is about the Nova, guys. Like, everybody seems to think I have a Nova. No, we're not using a Nova. The Nova is super hard to find. First of all, it's always sold out, so you can't really get one. So yeah. I don't know what to say. I don't have a Nova. It's that simple. You got the X870E Tai Chi. That is a good motherboard too. Yeah, that's a good one to match the 9800X3. That's actually a good one for 9800X3. Wondering if you should have went with a motherboard with AI overclocking, but like, nah, no. The AI overclocking stuff is going to be a gimmick because it's going to be very conservative in terms of the values that it selects for you to use. So you're still going to end up having to manually, you're still going to get better results with manual overclocking anyway. The X870E Nova Phantom Gaming, the 7900X TX Phantom wait, what? On the 7th of October? That was like, what, 3.5 weeks ago? 4K is like 3D glasses? What? Not much out there yet. No, I wouldn't say that. I game on 4K. I've been gaming, so I've been enjoying gaming at 4K for 2 years now, guys. I made the jump to 4K in 2022, and I'm on an OLED now. 4K OLED, 240 hertz, 4K. That is like end game stuff right there. So I wouldn't say that. You just have to have a high-end GPU primarily. But you want to also have a good enough CPU that can feed the GPU so that you're still GPU bound. Let's put it this way. You always want to be GPU bound. You never want to be CPU bound. It is worse to be CPU bound than to be GPU bound. If you're GPU bound, you're doing the right thing. Your system is working as intended. If you're CPU bound, that means you have an unbalanced PC build, and either the CPU is old or there's some kind of bottleneck, like the memory system is not set up correctly, or something's going on. Or it also could be the game itself is just really lousy and just creates a CPU bottleneck all the time. Case in point, Dragon's Dogma 2 is the most CPU-bound game of the year. Like, you are literally always CPU-bound if you're on a discrete GPU at the appropriate resolution for that GPU. You're GPU-bound on the 4080. The 4080 is going to get there's some conversation about like speaker systems or something. I don't know. Like I don't know what's going on there. I just occasionally I see comments about like something that I don't know what was the discussion about, but like 4 subwoofers and 2 what? 7500F placeholder until 9800X3D or 9950X3D. Will the 9950X3D have 3D caching both? We don't know. The rumors are that it might be or it might not be, but no one actually knows. When is the Godlike for AMD releasing? Good question. I don't know. Probably within the next month. You don't need the 9800X3D because your kid is on 9600K and he will get the 5800X3D. Okay. 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 No, these are computer glasses. Yeah, these glasses block the blue light from the monitor. Too dim ATX Apex thing. What? So yeah, maybe, I don't know. Currently, the 2 dim board is from... Who has the 2 dim board? There's an Asus board. It's a Strix board that has 2 dims. I forget which one. There's also the Gene. The X670E Gene, I believe. And then there was the ones from the last generation that had 2 dims from like MSI and Gigabyte. 16 lane with the Nova motherboard is cool. Okay. The Asus Apex has 2 dims. Yeah, Apex is the Intel one, guys. The Gene is the AMD one. I'm upgrading to 9800X3D from a 6-year-old 9900K. It's about time. Yeah, that is an old CPU at this point. Which one?
Eliminate all threats.
Is it an STI? Which board? What is the best speaker series for 5.1 under? You're gonna have to ask one of the guys in the chat that's talking about that because I don't know. I really don't know. What was I gonna do here? Oh, somebody had asked me to draw like block diagrams for some of the boards. I know that this one's not published yet, so we might do this one, the Extreme AI Top Gigabyte. The other one that was asked previously was the Intel base.
Keep that window open. It gets hot in here.
This one is called the ROG Max.
Right above the boiler or whatever.
Hero. So this is the Intel version of the Crosshair. So Asus has 2 heroes. They have the Maximus hero, which is the Intel version, and they have the Crosshair hero, which we've already done a lot of videos on at this point, which is the AMD version of the same motherboard. So I guess we'll do the block diagram for this one and this one, or maybe we'll just do this one, and then if anybody has any questions on specific motherboards, we can also dig into that as well. If you're planning to build like a gaming, for anyone out there who's planning to build like a 9800X3D gaming PC next week or whatever.
Oh, my hack and I quick still too, bro.
But I know like someone had asked me to do the block diagram for the Intel Hero board from Asus. It's kind of weird. We've been talking so much about 9800X3D. Now we're gonna like shift topics here, talking about Intel's Core Ultra series. So, yeah, but there's this, and then there's this one. Here, we're gonna have to clean up Paint, because Paint has, like, all this stuff on it.
Oh my god. Come back out. Come back out that window.
Delete this thing. Oh. Okay. So we'll do the AI top. Let's do that. From Gigabyte. B&H has it listed. Which one? The AI top? So first you gotta draw the socket. And then the chipset. Actually, you know what? Let's put this up here. So you have the AM5. Then you have the primary Promontory 21 chipset, and then you have the other one, the second Promontory 21. This is a dual. Then we have PCIe 5, PCIe 4, PCIe 3, PCIe 4, PCIe 3. And over on this other side would be like RAM and stuff. And then you have the interconnects of PCIe 4. Connecting all of these. Almost like a skeleton, like a spinal cord. So, by this point, everybody who watches these videos knows that this is the LGA 1718. Android 17 and Android 18 from the Cell Saga, or the Android Saga, and then we have Promontory 21, the first one, and Promontory 21, the second one. This is what distinguishes a X870E from an X870. An X870 doesn't actually. An X870 doesn't have this. It only has this and this. But the lane count is pretty much standardized across the board. So you get PCIe Gen 5, 24 lanes directly hardwired into the CPU. And then off of the chipset, we get PCIe 4.0. We get 4 lanes off of this one. And then we get PCIe 3.0, 4 lanes here. And then down on the second chipset, we get PCIe 8 lanes. And here we get 4 more PCIe 3.0 lanes. So these are the chipset lanes. In here, this is 4 lanes of Gen 4. This is 4 lanes of Gen 4. So when people read stuff online and they're like, well, how come it says 28 total lanes? Well, when they say 28 Gen 5 lanes, they mean these lanes and these lanes. But you don't use these lanes because these are interconnected.
Not as pretty as me though. Engines revving. Not as pretty as me though. Engines revving, stomachs rumbling. It's 11 and the party's just bubbling. Catch me huddled in the brum with the homies, while the haters sit at home in their chonies. Fuck the phonies, they look delicious. Rolling deep dish, Dayton's eating deep dish, religious. Been blessed with a fried food. Blowing kisses to the chicken to drive through, ride through. Old school gas guzzlers.
Rest and recuperate. Tomorrow you'll be running drills until you drop.
What are you sniffing? Good shit. Stop.
I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill.
For just a bill, I could cop a lil and roll it up. They say Seattle gotta chill, I think we're cold as fuck. You want some warmth? Buy a coffee, hold the cup, go back to where you came from. Tell them that you rode the duck. My posse stays on Broadway, you can find them off a Pike. We got hobos, homos, their babies on a bike. You got kinks, I think we got what you like. It don't take a Dutch boy to stick a finger in a dike. We're the type of people other people leave alone. Hit up Molly Moons, even goons gotta eat a cone. This was Jimmy's home, you can do as he condones. I'm the type to pick a fight with Phoenix Jones and eat his bones.
I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill.
What? My city's guilty, for that we're guilty every day. We got the baddest bitches, Manda Knox and Mary Kay. Legalize it, the Mary Jane or Mary Gay. I don't give a fuck, live it up or kiss my Harry. Ay, yes, yes, we the best, yes, yes. Fuck them if they hate, elevate and fuck the rest. I got something I should get up off my chest. If you whittle would invest in a bulletproof vest. Yeah, we don't like you, we would like to fight you. Exit stage left, here's a window you can fly through. You beat me, please, you could really try to. That'll happen just like Gatsby rapping without white dudes.
I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill.
What? Sitting at the blue moon, sipping on a blue moon. Burger in my belly, now they tell me I should chew food. I fucking do you, bump a few tunes. I'ma live forever, any less would be too soon. What a do, need a hook, let me know. It's in my blood, period, heavy flow. Roll deep with the fam, bam, and semi-pro. Solid steel feel, yeah, this could get messy, bro. Head to toe, looking fresh, taking pics. Got the DJ stunning on a mega mix. Party rocking with some pretty ass faggot chicks. Welcome to the hill, you don't like it, eat a bag of dicks.
I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, yes, I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill.
What?
to the chipset. Likewise, people are probably looking at this and they're like, well, how come the first chipset only has 4 and the second one has 8? Well, the reality is they have the same amount of lanes. You have to count them up. So, 4 plus 4 plus 4. That's 12. 12 Gen 4 lanes for the primary. 4 of them are uplink. 4 of them are downlink. These 4 downlink are the reason why this one only has 4 instead of 8, because the 4, it has to give 4 of the lanes to the downstream. See, that's why this guy only has 4 available, because what would have been 8, 4 of them are going down this way to the bottom chipset. The bottom chipset doesn't have something going down, so it gets to keep those 4 extra lanes, hence why it has 8 lanes. So they all have the same amount. So this motherboard, this is going to be, and this is not published anywhere online, so what you're about to see is like a world's first block diagram of the Gigabyte, well, this is actually, how do you call this? The Gigabyte X870E Aorus Extreme AI. How do they spell this? Is it all cap? Aorus Extreme with an X AI Top. That's the name of the motherboard. Okay, so this motherboard on the CPU, it has 16 lanes that go to a splitter or a switch, a PLX switch, which will potentially divide the lanes across the first and second PCIe slot. So you have your X16, so your graphics card connects here. So we'll call this PCIe X16. And then the second one is called PCIe X8. So this is the top. This is the top slot. This is the second slot. So the combinations are, you either have all the lanes to the GPU and nothing going to the second slot, or you have nothing in the second slot, so it'll be 0, or you have, actually, whoops, what am I doing? It's never 0. That's not right.
Yeah, okay.
It's either going to be X16 or X8. Meaning this first slot will either operate at 16 lanes or 8 lanes, depending on what is happening with the second slot. If the second slot is empty, it is operating at 0, not connected. So all 16 lanes are diverted to the GPU. If there is anything at all plugged into the second slot, it doesn't matter if it is a graphics card, if it is a sound card, if it is a 10 gigabit network card, which I don't see why anyone would need one of those because this thing has dual 10 gig.
About the boy we rescued in the
it will run at X8.
Entry to the region itself has been restricted for
Same thing with the graphics card.
We thought it
as soon as the second slot is activated, the graphics card runs at X8. Why?
Now
it gives half of the 16 to this guy so that he can work.
He claims to be part of a clan.
That's how it works.
Keepers. He said they have a village in a
so
land
that
we thought
is
uninhabited for ages.
That is the main, like, PCIe 1, PCIe 2 on
the
here.
Academy, of course,
then the other thing that's on here is an M.2.
It exists?
Nothing absolute.
So M.2.
The mysterious composition of the boy's pendant.
What do they call it? M2? What do they call this? M2A underscore CPU.
Sir?
That's the name.
It seems a certain monster had forced him to flee. It attacked his village.
M.2 underscore or M2A underscore CPU is what Gigabyte calls
the underground tunnel he used to make
this
his escape collapsed.
Is 16.
We found him.
This is 4
we are.
lanes.
Do we know the
So you
status
do the
of the
math.
village?
What is this? 16
And of the
plus
monster?
4, that equals 20. That means there's 4 more lanes available.
However,
We all
scholars
know,
hypothesize
after looking
that
at
it
all
may
these
be a
X870
monster
motherboards, I think
which
at this
we
point
thought to have
everybody knows
perished
what the
long
last
ago.
4 lanes go to.
Species?
They're calling it
go
the
to
White Wraith. The
the
guild has authorized the
ASM
rescue of the keepers and an
4242.
investigation into this monster. I've selected
The
you
ASMedia
as a lead hunter
USB
for this
4
expedition.
chipset,
Thank you,
which
sir.
allows dual 40 gigabit
Finding the village
USB
won't be
4
easy.
on the back
You'll
of the
need
motherboard.
proper guide.
That is how
Speaking
you
of
get
which,
USB
I
4.
have
That's
an
taking up
extra
4
assignment
lanes
for
of
you.
potentially Gen 5 bandwidth. So that is a lot of bandwidth for just 2 USB 4 ports. So that takes care of all of the CPU
Hello,
lanes.
my
So
name is
16 plus 4 is 24. Everything is there.
It's okay.
And then the total lane would be 28 if you include the downlink to the chipset. Why is there no chipset for Gen 5 SSDs?
How are ya?
Great.
Why would you need a chipset for Gen 5 SSDs? This is a Gen
As soon as
5
we find a good
SSD
spot,
slot.
we can get things set up and ready to go. And then we can
If
get
that's what you're
started.
asking.
This is
is
gonna be great.
Anything that connects here
Yeah.
can be up to Gen
I
5.
hope we find them soon.
To split. There are actually some motherboards that do that. Now, they're not doing that for Gen 5, but I'll tell you, one of them that does it is the Tomahawk. The Tomahawk does what you're saying. The X870 Tomahawk splits. The Gen 5 takes 4 Gen 5 lanes, shares them between it shares them between the ASM and a second Gen 5 SSD. So some of them do that. The Godlight from MSI also does it. But the thing is, Gen 5 SSDs run very hot. They're hard to cool. So you have to have really good cooling if you're going to use them. So you want to keep that in mind.
That's all right.
Can you reach it?
Okay, now
try.
moving on
I'm
to the
coming
primary
too.
chipset. So this one only has the 4 lanes. What they've done here is really interesting. So they have 2 devices that they've connected that each use 2 lanes. 2 lanes for this, 2 for that. 2 lanes to a splitter. Well, it actually is not a splitter, it's a switch. So they're using a switch that takes 2 lanes and it's going to be divided between 2 devices. One is going to be M2B underscore SB, which means chipset. SB stands for South Bridge. This is the South Bridge. This is the SoC, also known as System on Chip, which is the North Bridge. So think of this as North Bridge connectivity and South Bridge connectivity. But they don't use
Looks like it knows
North Bridge as a terminology anymore, so they'll just say CPU. I just deleted that thing. Oh wow. Oops. Oh well. So M2B underscore SB. And the other thing that connects here is a PCIe X2 slot. So the bottom PCIe slot on this motherboard is an X2 Gen 4 PCIe slot, which shares with one of the Gen 4 M.2. So then the last thing here, this is going to be one of the 2 10 gig lanes. And then over here on PCIe 3, they're doing 4 SATA ports. They're taking 1 lane of Gen 3 and they're converting it to 1 SATA interface. per device. So they literally have a bunch of SATA devices here. So SATA 1, 2, 3, and 4. So all the SATA connects there. Okay, so that takes care of that. So we got one of the 10 gigs. We've got PCIe X2. We got another M.2. All right, so that leaves the bottom of the motherboard. It's the second chipset now. Oh, also, this is, well, you know, this is like all the lanes. So this is like X1, X1, X1. So all 4 of these are used up for the SATA. And then 2 for this, and 2 for that, so that equals 4.
Let's get out of here.
I'll cover you.
Okay, now the bottom chipset. So this one, this is very easy, this last part. So right here, what they have done is they basically put 2 M.2. Is that, what is this, Anbert B just subscribed, thanks for the sub. So M2, I think M2, oh, you know what, I think I named it. M2B underscore SD. Maybe it was M2C. I forget. It would be on the product page. M2D underscore SD. This one might be M2E or something.
Then we can bring those rocks down.
And these are 4 lanes each.
Look, the others.
4, so all 8 lanes are taken up, so that's good. And then over here on the last part of this, they have 2 and 2 here. So they got 2, and then what they've done is here they have a second 10 gig LAN. And then the last thing they put was a Wi-Fi 7. And this is the higher end 320 megahertz Wi-Fi 7. So that's what they've connected on the remaining